The night my world ended, it began with pancakes. "Happy birthday, babe," Clara whispered, her lips warm against mine, the scent of coffee and maple syrup clinging to her like a second skin. For a fleeting, perfect moment, suspended in the amber glow of our sunlit kitchen, life felt complete. She had everything planned, of course. Clara was an architect of moments, a composer of memories, and my birthday was her magnum opus. "Tonight's going to be special," she said, her eyes sparkling with an excitement that felt both genuine and something else. Something I couldn't quite name. If Clara said it was going to be special, I knew she meant it. She was not a woman who dealt in half measures. She'd been dropping hints for weeks about a surprise dinner, a curated guest list of close friends, and a few of her colleagues, people she insisted I needed to meet. "You'll finally get to meet Adrian," she'd added, her voice a little too casual as she poured a river of syrup over a stack of pancakes she'd made for me. My brow furrowed. Adrian. The name had become a recurring character in the narrative of her work life over the past year. Her amazing boss. Her supportive mentor. The lifesaver during a particularly stressful product launch. I had never met the man, but he seemed to occupy an inordinate amount of real estate in her world, more than I was entirely comfortable with. Still, it was my birthday. I wasn't about to let a flicker of unease tarnish the day. Clara, ever perceptive, noticed my hesitation. "Don't worry," she teased, a light, dismissive wave of her hand. "He's harmless. You'll love him." She spoke with such conviction, I almost believed her. Almost. The day unfolded in a pleasant, predictable rhythm. Calls from family, gifts from friends, and the constant, low-level hum of Clara's meticulous planning. She was often on her phone, confirming last-minute details, her thumbs flying across the screen. It wasn't unusual for her. She thrived on orchestrating perfect moments, and I was, for the most part, a grateful beneficiary. But as the hours ticked by, a faint, nameless anxiety began to gnaw at me. Maybe it was the way she seemed more distracted than usual, her phone lighting up with notifications she would hurriedly swipe away before I could see the source. Or maybe it was just the looming presence of Adrian, a man I had built into a rival in my own mind. I told myself I was being paranoid, letting a petty, unfounded jealousy get the better of me. Our marriage was built on trust, wasn't it? The highlight of the morning was a simple envelope she handed me. Inside, a card, her familiar, elegant script filling the page. "To the love of my life, today and always." It was pure Clara, heartfelt, personal, a perfect distillation of all the reasons I had married her. At the bottom, a handwritten note. "Tonight will be unforgettable." Something about the way she had said it earlier, and the way it was written now, lingered. Was it the excitement in her voice? Or was there an undercurrent of something else? Guilt? I shook the thought away. It was an ugly, unworthy suspicion. My wife would never do anything to intentionally hurt me. As the afternoon waned, I found myself pacing the living room, a restless energy coursing through me. Part of me was eager to celebrate, to be surrounded by the people who mattered. But another, darker part of me was bracing for something I couldn't yet name. In hindsight, my gut was screaming at me. That small, insistent voice whispering "pay attention" should have been a roar. But hindsight is a cruel, smug teacher. It only shows up after the test, is over to tell you all the answers you got wrong. Back then, all I could think about was pancakes, presents, and the promise of an unforgettable night. Turns out, Clara was right. It was unforgettable, just not in the way either of us had planned. Evening arrived like a theatrical production. Clara was the director, the star, the whirlwind at the center of it all. She wore a red dress that seemed to have been poured onto her, a slash of crimson against the soft, warm tones of our home. She was beautiful, but there was a restless quality to her movements, a high-strung energy that felt more like an actress preparing for a difficult scene than a wife excited for her husband's birthday. The guests arrived, a mix of our shared friends and her work colleagues. I played the part of the gracious host, the happy birthday boy, but the undercurrent of unease had grown into a steady, thrumming hum beneath the surface of my smile. And then he walked in. Adrian. My gut reaction was a cold, sinking certainty. He was everything I had imagined, and worse. Handsome, not in a rugged, authentic way, but in a polished, too perfect, corporate brochure way. His suit was impeccably tailored, his smile a weapon of practiced charm. He greeted Clara with a familiarity that was an immediate violation, a proprietary hand on the small of her back that lingered a fraction of a second too long. "David, this is Adrian," Clara said, her voice a little too bright. "The birthday boy," Adrian boomed, extending a hand. His grip was firm, a classic power move. "Clara's told me so much about you. You've got yourself a real gem here." His words were friendly, but his eyes held a smug, dismissive glint that made the hair on my arms stand up. The night unfolded like a slow-motion car crash I was powerless to stop. Adrian held court, his voice dominating every conversation, his stories a little too polished, his laughter a little too loud. Clara, seated beside him, was his perfect audience. She laughed harder at his jokes, leaned closer when he spoke, her attention a spotlight that was aimed entirely at him. The others didn't seem to notice, or perhaps they chose not to. But I saw it. Every shared glance, every subtle touch, every inside joke that excluded the rest of the table. I was becoming a ghost at my own party. The moment that shattered my willful denial came from one of Clara's friends, a bubbly woman named Linda. She leaned over to me, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Adrian's a riot, isn't he? Clara's always going on about how amazing he is. You're lucky she has such a great mentor." Lucky. The word was a slap in the face. Lucky to watch another man bask in my wife's adoration? Lucky to be a supporting character in the story of my own birthday? The storm inside me began to brew in earnest. After the cake was cut, Clara announced she needed to check on something upstairs. Adrian followed a few minutes later, his departure as subtle as a stage exit. The buzz of unease in my ears became a roar. I stood there, holding an empty glass, the conversations around me blurring into a meaningless drone. My heart was pounding, a frantic drumbeat of dread. Logic told me to stay put, to trust her, to not be the jealous, irrational husband. But logic had abandoned me. My instincts were screaming. Excusing myself, I made my way upstairs, my steps cautious, my breath held tight in my chest. The hallway was quiet, the party a distant murmur below. As I approached our bedroom, I heard them. Muffled voices. Clara's and his. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. Part of me, the part that still clung to the hope of a simple misunderstanding, begged me to turn around. But the part of me that needed to know the truth, no matter how ugly, was stronger. I pushed the door open, and there it was. The truth, in all its devastating clarity. He had her face cupped in his hand, his thumb tracing her cheek with a possessive tenderness that was not his to give. And Clara, my Clara, was tilting her head up, her lips parted, meeting his in a kiss that was not a surprise, not a mistake, but a slow, deliberate act of intimacy. It was practiced, familiar. My heart didn't just break, it detonated. The sound of the party downstairs, the air in my lungs, the very ground beneath my feet, it all vanished. My world narrowed to that single, obscene image. They noticed me a second later. Clara froze, her eyes widening in a classic tableau of shock and guilt. Adrian, on the other hand, had the breathtaking audacity to smirk. He stepped back, not with the panicked haste of a man caught, but with an air of casual, infuriating nonchalance. "Whoa, whoa, easy there, man," he said, raising his hands in a placating gesture, as if I were the one who had transgressed. "It's harmless fun. Harmless fun, asterisk." The two words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the room. My vision tunneled. A primal, white-hot rage, an emotion I had never truly known, flooded every cell in my body. "What the hell did you just say?" I growled, my voice a low, guttural sound I didn't recognize. "David, it's not what it looks like," Clara stammered, moving toward me, her hands outstretched in a useless plea. "Not what it looks like." I barked, a wild, mirthless laugh escaping my lips. "It looks like you're kissing your boss in our bedroom on my birthday. What part of that am I misinterpreting, Clara?" Adrian chuckled. Actually chuckled. "Relax, David. No need to make a scene. We were just messing around." That was it. The smug grin. The utter lack of remorse. The gall of this man to stand in my home, with my wife, and treat me like a minor inconvenience. Something inside me snapped, a frayed cable under too much strain. My eyes darted around the room and landed on the heavy, modernist lamp on the bedside table. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I acted. I grabbed the lamp, its metal base cool and solid in my hand, and I swung it with all the force of my grief and rage. The sound was sickening. A crack of shattering glass as the lampshade disintegrated, followed by the dull, wet thud of metal connecting with bone. Adrian crumpled to the floor like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Clara screamed, a high, piercing sound that seemed to tear through the fabric of the night. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over his head, shaking. "Are you insane?" she shrieked, her voice breaking. "You could have killed him." I stood there, chest heaving, the lamp still clutched in my hand. Blood was trickling from a gash on Adrian's forehead, stark red against his pale skin. He was groaning, not dead, but the reality of what I had done began to sink in, a cold, heavy dread. "David, please," Clara sobbed, looking up at me, tears streaming down her face. "Calm down. We can fix this. It wasn't what you think. I didn't mean for this to happen. Didn't mean for what to happen, Clara." I snapped, the rage returning. "For me to catch you? For him to end up bleeding on our bedroom floor? Or for you to betray me?" She had no answer. The silence was broken only by Adrian's labored breathing. I let the lamp slip from my numb fingers. It hit the floor with a dull thud. My heart was a chaotic symphony of fury, betrayal, and a terrifying, dawning realization that my life, as I knew it, was over. Without another word, I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. I stormed down the stairs, past the confused, staring faces of our guests, and out into the cool night air. The betrayal was the spark. The violence was the explosion. And this, a voice deep inside me whispered, was only the beginning. The bathroom became my sanctuary, a small, sterile white room where the chaos couldn't reach me. I gripped the edges of the porcelain sink, my knuckles white, and stared at the stranger in the mirror. His eyes were wide, his face pale, his breath coming in ragged gasps. This man had just committed an act of violence. This man's wife had just betrayed him. I didn't know him. Every time I closed my eyes, the scene replayed. The kiss, his smug grin, the sickening thud of the lamp. Harmless fun, the phrase was a brand on my mind. I splashed cold water on my face, again and again, but it couldn't wash away the filth of the moment. A knock on the door. "Clara." "David, please." Her voice was a muffled, trembling plea. "We need to talk. Let me explain." "Explain what? The physics of adultery? The emotional calculus that led her to his lips?" The words were meaningless, but she persisted. "I swear, it wasn't what it looked like. He kissed me and I was so surprised, I didn't know how to stop it. The lie was so pathetic, so insulting, it was almost enough to make me laugh." I wrenched the door open. She stood there, a portrait of manufactured devastation. Her tears had artfully smudged her mascara. I brushed past her without a word. Back in the bedroom, Adrian was gone. The only evidence of his presence was a dark, ugly stain on the beige carpet and the shattered remains of the lamp. "Where is he?" I asked, my voice flat. "I called his driver," she admitted, wringing her hands. "He's taking him to the hospital." "The hospital?" A bitter, sharp laugh escaped me. "And what's he going to tell the doctors? That he tripped and fell? Or that he got a lamp to the head for making out with his employee's wife in her own bedroom?" She flinched. "I panicked, David. He was bleeding." "You panicked?" I rounded on her, the rage boiling over again. "What about me, Clara? Do you have any idea what you've done? You blew up our lives, and you're worried about him." "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words small and useless. "Don't." I held up a hand. "Just don't." I grabbed my jacket and keys. Her panicked, "Where are you going?" followed me out the door. "Anywhere but here," I muttered, slamming it behind me. I drove for hours, the city lights a meaningless blur through a film of unshed tears. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, tight knot in my gut. How many people at that party knew? How many of her colleagues had been watching their affair unfold for months, pitying the poor, oblivious husband? The darker thought was about Adrian. The smugness of the man. The absolute certainty he had displayed, as if he had a right to be there, a right to her. Men like that didn't just stumble into affairs. They engineered them. When I finally returned home, in the cold, pre-dawn hours, the house was silent. Clara was asleep on the couch, her face tear-stained and pale. I walked past her, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. The bedroom was a crime scene. The bloodstain on the carpet was a dark, accusing eye. I needed answers, not her tearful, self-serving excuses. I needed the truth. Her phone was on the nightstand, charging. Years ago, in a moment of what I had thought was mutual trust, we had shared our passwords. I had never once felt the need to use hers. Trust had been the foundation of our marriage. Tonight, I was taking a sledgehammer to that foundation. I unlocked her phone. My hands were shaking. At first, it was all innocent. Texts from friends, from her mother. Then I found it. A thread not with Adrian's name, but with a simple, innocuous label. Work project. My blood ran cold as I read. It wasn't just a few flirtatious texts. It was a novel of deceit. It started months ago. Professional compliments from him that slowly, insidiously, became personal. Invitations to grab a coffee to discuss the presentation that morphed into dinners. There were photos, selfies of him at his desk, sent to her late at night. Asterisk, wish I was home, but at least I have you to keep me sane. Asterisk and her replies, filled with flirty emojis and inside jokes, blurring the line between colleague and confidant, until the line disappeared entirely. I scrolled deeper, my stomach churning. Hotel bookings for business trips I didn't know she'd taken. A message from him. Asterisk, you looked stunning in that meeting today. Couldn't stop thinking about you. Asterisk in her reply, the one that broke the last remaining thread of hope in me. Asterisk, it felt wrong, but I can't say I regret it. Asterisk, I threw the phone onto the bed as if it were burning my hand. But I wasn't done. I grabbed my laptop. If the texts were this bad, the emails would be worse. They were. In a folder labeled A, I found the genesis of the affair. It hadn't been a gradual slide. It had been a calculated seduction. Adrian had targeted her from the beginning, praising her work, calling her brilliant, indispensable. He had manufactured reasons to work late, to have one-on-one meetings. He had positioned himself as her mentor, her champion, all while slowly, methodically, undermining her marriage. But the final, devastating blow was an email thread between Clara and Linda, the bubbly friend from the party. It was dated 6 months ago. Linda was warning her about Adrian. Asterisk, be careful, Clara. He has a reputation. He preys on the women who work for him. He did it to Sarah in marketing last year. Asterisk. Clara's reply was defensive, dismissive. Asterisk, Adrian's not like that. He's just supportive. You're reading too much into it. Asterisk. She had been warned. She knew who he was, what he was, and she had walked into his arms anyway. The blindness wasn't ignorance. It was willful. I slammed the laptop shut, my mind a maelstrom of rage and a new, chilling clarity. This wasn't just a simple affair. This was a pattern. Adrian was a predator. And Clara had been his willing accomplice. I walked back out to the living room, holding her phone. She startled awake, her eyes wide with fear when she saw the look on my face. How long? I demanded, my voice cold and sharp. She saw the phone, and her face crumpled. David, I can explain. Don't. I cut her off, my voice shaking with a fury I could no longer contain. Don't you dare try to blame him. You knew. You knew who he was, and you chose him anyway. She stared at me, speechless, as the realization of what I'd found dawned on her. The sobs that racked her body were not for me, not for us. They were for herself, for the fact that her carefully constructed web of lies had finally been torn apart. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was about making sure Adrian never did this to anyone else again. This was war, and I had just found my ammunition. The rage was a fire, but I could not let it consume me. It had to be forged into a weapon, sharp and precise. Adrian had used his power, his position, his calculated charm to dismantle my life. I would use the truth to dismantle his. The day after the party, I left the house before Clara was awake. The air was thick with her unspoken apologies, her guilt a palpable presence in the room. I couldn't breathe it. I drove to a small, anonymous coffee shop across town and called the first soldier in my new army, Linda, the former colleague who had tried to warn Clara. She was hesitant at first. I don't want any trouble, she'd said, her voice low. He's already caused trouble, I replied. For you, for me, for who knows how many others. He relies on his victims being too scared or too ashamed to speak up. That's how he keeps winning. All I'm asking for is your story. Over coffee, she told me everything. It was a textbook case of corporate predation. The inappropriate compliments, the late-night texts about work, the subtle threats to her career advancement if she didn't play along. He never crosses a line that would get him fired by HR, she explained, her hands wrapped around her warm mug. He's too smart for that. He just creates an environment where you feel like you have no choice but to go along with it. Her story was the blueprint. I spent the next few days working with a quiet intensity, channeling my grief and anger into a meticulous investigation. I contacted other former employees of Adrian's company. Names Linda had given me. Some hung up on me. But others, emboldened by the fact that they were no longer alone, agreed to talk. A pattern emerged, consistent and damning. He was a predator who thrived on the power imbalance of the workplace. While I gathered my forces, I maintained a cold, detached peace at home. Clara tiptoed around me, making desperate attempts at conversation, trying to explain her side. I didn't engage. We can talk when this is all over, I'd say, my voice flat, leaving her to wonder what this was. Her uncertainty was a small, bitter satisfaction. The breakthrough came from a man named Thomas, one of Adrian's former assistants. He had been fired after witnessing an incriminating conversation. But Thomas had been smart. He had recorded it. He was bragging to another executive. Thomas told me, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and vindication, about how he could get any woman in the office to do whatever he wanted. He said, "It's not coercion if they think they're getting something out of it. Everyone wants a shortcut." The recording was my silver bullet. It was the irrefutable proof of his intent, his predatory mindset, and his own arrogant voice. Now I had the ammunition. I needed the right battlefield. A private confrontation would be useless. He would lie, deny, and spin his way out of it. He needed to be exposed, publicly, humiliated in the same way he had sought to humiliate me. The opportunity presented itself in the form of the company's annual Innovators Gala, a lavish, self-congratulatory event that Adrian himself was hosting. It was the perfect stage. With the help of Thomas and a few other sympathetic employees still at the company, I formulated a plan. It was audacious, risky, and would have spectacular consequences, one way or another. I secured access to the event's AV system. I edited the testimonies, the emails, the text messages, and, of course, the damning audio recording into a short, brutal presentation. The night of the gala, I walked into the grand ballroom feeling a strange, surreal calm. Adrian was in his element, a king in his court, basking in the adoration of his colleagues and clients. He saw me from across the room, and his eyes narrowed for a second, a flicker of annoyance, but he quickly dismissed me, turning back to his fawning audience. He saw me as a minor problem that had been dealt with. He had no idea I was the executioner. Clara wasn't with me. I had told her I needed space, that I was staying with a friend. She had accepted it, probably relieved to avoid a public scene. As Adrian took the stage to deliver his keynote speech, I slipped into the AV booth. My hands were steady as I queued up the file. His voice boomed over the speakers, full of self-important platitudes. Tonight is about celebrating success, innovation, and the incredible team that makes it all possible. With a single click, I hit play. The large screen behind him flickered. He paused, annoyed. "Looks like a small technical glitch," he chuckled. The crowd tittered politely. Then the first image appeared. A screenshot of a flirtatious email from him to Clara. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Adrian's smile froze. More images flashed on the screen. Texts, receipts, a photo of him and Clara at a hotel bar. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. His face turned from confused, to angry, to pale with dawning horror. He barked at the AV technicians, but they were as stunned as everyone else. Then came the video testimonies, the blurred faces and distorted voices of the women he had harassed and manipulated, each story another nail in his coffin. Finally, the audio. His own voice, clear and confident, filled the silent, cavernous ballroom. It's not coercion if they think they're getting something out of it. The room erupted. It was a cacophony of shock, disgust, and outrage. Adrian stood on the stage, exposed and alone, stammering. This is a setup. A lot. I stepped out from the shadows of the booth and walked towards the stage. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. His eyes found mine, and the confusion on his face was replaced by pure, undiluted rage. "You," he spat. "Me," I said, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone still live on the lectern. "You thought you could walk into my life, Destroy my marriage and get away with it? You thought you were untouchable. You were wrong. His wife, a woman I had never met, sat at a front table, her hand covering her mouth, her face a mask of utter devastation. The security team moved toward the stage, but not for me. The CEO of the company, a man with a face like thunder, was already on his phone to the police. As they escorted a protesting, sputtering Adrian out of the ballroom, I felt a strange emptiness. The fire of my rage had been spent. I had won. His career was over. His reputation was in tatters. But the victory felt hollow. The applause I had imagined was replaced by the chaotic buzz of a scandal unfolding. I had burned his world to the ground, but I was still standing in the ashes of my own. When I returned to the house, it was to a scene of quiet devastation. Clara was on the couch, a ghost in the dimly lit living room. She had clearly heard what had happened. The news was already spreading like wildfire. "I hope you're happy," she whispered, her voice raw from crying. "Happy?" I let out a bitter laugh. "There's no happiness here, Clara. Just consequences." She looked up, her eyes pleading. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen, David. I was stupid. I was lost. He made me feel." "Don't." I cut her off, my voice sharp. "Don't you dare say it was because he made you feel important. Was I not enough? Was the life we built, the vows we made, not enough?" Her silence was the only answer I needed. I sat down in the armchair across from her, the space between us a chasm. "Do you understand what you've lost, Clara? It's not just me. It's not just this house. It's respect. It's trust. It's everything. And you have no one to blame but yourself. We can fix this," she begged, desperation creeping into her voice. "Please, David, don't give up on us." I looked at the woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, and I felt a profound, aching sadness. "I don't know if there's an us left to save," I said, my voice quiet but final. "Right now, when I look at you, all I see is him. And I can't live like that." I walked out of the room, leaving her to her sobs. The war with Adrian was over. But the civil war, the one raging inside the ruins of my own marriage, had just begun. And I had no idea if there would be any survivors. Life after the gala was a slow, painful crawl out of the wreckage. The divorce papers were an inevitability, a quiet, legal acknowledgement of a death that had occurred months earlier. Clara moved out, taking with her the last vestiges of the life we had shared. The house fell silent, a silence that was both a relief and a burden. I started the process of rebuilding, not just the house, but myself. I painted walls, bought new furniture, systematically erasing the ghost of her presence. I threw myself into my work, into the gym, into reconnecting with friends who had been neglected during the slow decay of my marriage. I was functioning. I was surviving. But I wasn't healing. The shadow of Adrian lingered. He was out on bail, a pariah in the business world, but a man with a deep-seated grudge and nothing left to lose is a dangerous animal. I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't done with me. The first sign came one evening on my way home from work. A black sedan, clinging to my tail through several nonsensical turns. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled into a well-lit parking lot, and the car followed. My hand was on my phone, ready to dial 911 when the driver's door opened. It wasn't Adrian. It was Thomas, his former assistant. "I had to talk to you," he said, his voice urgent. "He's been asking questions. About you. About your wife. He's obsessed. He blames you for everything. Just be careful, okay? He's not stable." The warning sent a chill down my spine. I installed security cameras, varied my routines, lived with a low-level hum of anxiety that never quite went away. The fear was a constant companion. Then came the text from an unknown number. "Asterisk, you took everything from me. Now it's my turn. Asterisk." The glass of whiskey I was holding slipped from my numb fingers and shattered on the floor. The house, my newly reclaimed sanctuary, suddenly felt like a trap. He was watching me. The next day, I saw a car parked across the street. A different one. He was taunting me, playing a psychological game, trying to push me to the edge. And in that moment, as I stared at that car, something shifted inside me. The fear was still there, but it was eclipsed by a familiar, white-hot rage. The same rage I had felt in the bedroom that night. Adrian thought he could break me. He thought he could intimidate me into a state of perpetual fear. He had underestimated me once before. He was about to do it again. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But this time, I wouldn't be reacting to his moves. This time, I would be the one setting the trap. He had destroyed my peace. Now, I was going to destroy his.